My wife cheated on me with a coworker during fake yoga sessions, then I caught her but Hey Reddit, I never thought I'd be writing something like this, but here I am. My name's Jason, and I've been married to Mia for 7 years. To most people, we looked like the perfect couple. Both of us had successful careers, me working in finance, and Mia involved with an NGO that focused on climate change projects. It was the kind of life where we had everything, friends, travel, money, but lately, I've been feeling like everything's changed. Mia's job had always been demanding, but she seemed to thrive on it. She's always been passionate about making the world a better place, and I admired that about her. But over the last year, her work became more than just long hours. She'd stay out late, traveling to remote locations for meetings, and brushing off my concerns by saying it was all part of the job. At first, I didn't think too much of it. I trusted her, and we had a solid relationship, or so I thought. One day, she told me she was starting yoga classes. It sounded like a good idea since Mia had always complained about stress, so I didn't think twice when she said she had a class every Tuesday evening. I thought yoga might help her relax, and she'd even come home glowing after each session. I was happy for her, even if it seemed a bit out of character. But then things started getting weird. One evening, while Mia was supposedly at yoga, I was home alone when the doorbell rang. It was a delivery from some fancy boutique travel company addressed to her, but sent to our house. That didn't make sense since she never used our home address for work stuff. So, curious and maybe a bit suspicious, I opened the package. Inside was a beautifully wrapped box, and tucked beneath a layer of tissue paper was a note. It read, "Can't wait to see you under the stars again." See, my heart sank. I read the note over and over, trying to make sense of it. This wasn't from one of her coworkers, that much was clear. It felt personal, intimate. Again? My mind went into overdrive. Who was this C? What had they been doing under the stars? And how long had this been going on? I knew I couldn't ignore it. Something was definitely wrong. That night, I didn't say anything. I wasn't ready to confront her yet. Instead, I waited until she was asleep and checked her calendar and emails, something I never thought I'd do. Sure enough, I found a pattern. A lot of her so-called work trips overlapped with the schedule of an environmental journalist named Connor. She'd mentioned him in passing before, just casually, like he was a guy she met at a conference. Nothing that raised any flags at the time. But now, it all seemed to fit together. Connor was in almost all of the same locations as Mia during her travels. I scrolled through the emails, my heart pounding in my chest. There was nothing outright incriminating in her work correspondence, but I noticed she'd deleted some personal messages. That felt deliberate, like she was trying to hide something. My hands shook as I closed her laptop, my mind racing. I spent the next few days in a daze, going through the motions at work but not really being there. Every time I thought about that note, my stomach twisted into knots. I didn't want to believe it was true, but I couldn't shake the feeling that Mia was seeing someone else behind my back. I needed to know for sure. The breaking point came when she came home from one of her yoga sessions looking happier than usual. She hugged me, her smile wide and carefree, and I just couldn't take it anymore. That night, I confronted her. I sat her down and asked about the package. She looked confused at first, then her face paled when I showed her the note. Mia stammered, saying it wasn't what it looked like. But I pressed her, telling her I knew about Connor, about the overlapping trips, and how things didn't add up. She finally admitted that she knew Connor but denied any affair. She claimed they were just friends, bonded over their shared passion for the environment. She insisted that the note was just an inside joke, that I was overreacting. But I wasn't buying it. Something in her eyes told me there was more to the story, and the longer I questioned her, the more her story began to fall apart. She confessed, eventually, that she and Connor had grown close, that their relationship had shifted over time. She tried to frame it like it was something that just happened, like it was beyond her control. The worst part? She admitted it wasn't just an emotional connection. They'd been sleeping together for months, sneaking away during these work trips. She tried to justify it by saying that things between us had become routine, that she'd found something with Connor that reignited a part of her she didn't even know was missing. I sat there, numb, as she continued to talk. It was like I'd been punched in the gut, and I could barely breathe. I didn't know what to say, what to do. All I could think about was how much I trusted her, how much I'd built my life around her, and now it all felt like a lie. After Mia's confession, I don't think I said anything for a while. I just sat there, staring at her, feeling this overwhelming sense of disbelief wash over me. I could see her mouth moving, but her words didn't register. All I could hear was the sound of my own heart pounding in my chest, my mind racing to make sense of everything. This wasn't the Mia I thought I knew. She tried to explain herself, saying it wasn't about me, that she still loved me, but that her feelings for Connor just grew over time. She said they connected in a way she couldn't describe. The whole thing sounded like some sort of twisted love story she'd built in her head. But all I saw was betrayal, the destruction of everything we had. I asked her how long it had been going on. She hesitated, then said it started about a year ago. A year. I couldn't believe it. She had been lying to my face for an entire year, going off on these so-called work trips, coming home and pretending everything was fine. Every time I thought she was stressed from work, she was off with him, sneaking around like I was some kind of fool. I was furious, but more than that, I was hurt. I thought we had a solid relationship, something that could withstand anything. We'd been through rough patches before, like every couple, but nothing like this. She said she felt neglected, that things between us had become boring and predictable. I couldn't wrap my head around it. We had a life together, plans for the future, and she was willing to throw it all away for some guy she met through work? I tried to keep calm, but I felt myself spiraling. I asked her if she planned to leave me for him. She looked down at the floor, and for a moment, I thought she was going to say yes. But then she shook her head, saying she didn't know. She claimed she didn't want to break up our marriage, but at the same time, she wasn't sure she could give him up either. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. She was torn between us? This wasn't some decision she had to weigh like she was picking out furniture. This was our life, our marriage, and she couldn't decide? I felt my hands shaking, and I had to get up and walk away before I said something I'd regret. I spent the night on the couch. I couldn't be near her. I couldn't stand the sight of her knowing what she'd done. All I kept thinking about was her and Connor, what they had been doing behind my back. The images in my head made me sick. I couldn't sleep, couldn't think straight. I just lay there staring at the ceiling, wondering how I had missed the signs. Maybe I had been too focused on work, too caught up in my own routine to notice what was happening right in front of me. The next morning, things were awkward. Mia tried to talk to me, but I wasn't ready. I didn't want to hear any more excuses or explanations. I needed space. I needed time to think. I left the house and just drove. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I couldn't be there, not with her, not after everything that had happened. I ended up at a friend's house, someone I could trust. I told him everything, about the affair, about how long it had been going on. He listened, letting me vent, and then he asked the question I had been avoiding. What are you going to do about it? I didn't know. I felt torn between wanting to fix things and knowing that this might be beyond repair. Mia hadn't even promised to end things with Connor. She was still wrapped up in whatever fantasy she had built with him, and I wasn't sure if I could ever trust her again. Could we work through this? Could I even look at her the same way? Over the next few days, I tried to avoid her as much as possible. When I did see her, the conversations were tense and awkward. She kept saying she was sorry, that she didn't mean to hurt me, but those words felt hollow. How could she not have known this would destroy me? I suggested therapy, hoping that maybe if we worked through this with a professional, we could salvage something. Mia agreed, but I could tell she wasn't fully committed. She said all the right things, but her actions didn't match her words. She was still distant, still texting on her phone late at night, and I couldn't shake the feeling that she was still in contact with Connor. That's when I decided I needed more answers. I had to know if she was still seeing him, if she was still lying to me. I felt guilty even thinking about it, but I ended up putting a tracking app on her phone. It felt wrong, invasive, but after everything she had done, I didn't feel like I could trust her to be honest with me anymore. I tried to convince myself I was overreacting, that maybe she was telling the truth, but a few days later, the app confirmed what I had feared. Mia wasn't at yoga that night. She was at a hotel on the other side of town, the same hotel where her and Connor had stayed during one of their work trips. My heart sank all over again. She hadn't stopped. She was still seeing him, still betraying me. I felt this rush of anger and hurt all over again, but this time, there was no confusion. She had made her choice, and it wasn't me. That night, after discovering she was still seeing Connor, I felt like my world had come crashing down all over again. It was one thing for her to say she was sorry, to admit to the affair, but to keep lying and sneaking around even after I found out? It felt like a slap in the face. I didn't confront her right away. I couldn't. I needed time to figure out how to handle it, but I knew one thing for sure, I wasn't going to sit around and let her play me for a fool. I spent hours that night pacing the living room, replaying everything that had happened since her affair came to light. All the excuses, the empty apologies, the fake promises to work things out. And here she was, still meeting him, still going behind my back. The next morning, I made a decision. I wasn't going to let her continue to lie to me, but I also wasn't ready to explode in a fit of rage. I wanted to confront her calmly, to take control of the situation. So when Mia got home later that day, I asked her to sit down, just like I had done when I first confronted her about the affair. She looked nervous, like she knew something was coming, but tried to act normal, as if nothing had changed. I started by telling her that I knew she had lied again. I told her about the hotel, about how I knew she hadn't been at yoga the night before. Her face went pale. For a moment, she looked like she might deny it again, but then she let out this heavy sigh, like she was relieved she didn't have to keep pretending anymore. Mia admitted she had seen Connor again. She claimed it was the last time, that she needed to say goodbye properly and that she didn't want to hurt me anymore. But I could tell she wasn't being completely honest. She was only coming clean because I caught her, not because she genuinely wanted to end things. I asked her if she still had feelings for him. She didn't answer right away, but eventually, she nodded. That hit me harder than anything she had said before. Not only had she betrayed me, but she still wasn't letting go of this other guy. I sat there, staring at her, feeling this mixture of rage and heartbreak. I asked her what she wanted, if she was even interested in saving our marriage. Mia said she didn't know, that she was confused and torn. She told me that a part of her wanted to fix things between us, but another part of her couldn't stop thinking about Connor. It felt like she was stringing me along, keeping me around while she tried to figure out what she really wanted. That's when I realized I couldn't do this anymore. I had been holding on to hope that we could fix things, that maybe this was just a terrible mistake that we could work through, but in that moment, I saw the truth. Mia wasn't committed to fixing anything. She was still wrapped up in her fantasy with Connor, and I was just the safety net, the backup plan. I told her we needed to separate. I couldn't keep living in this limbo, not knowing if she was going to choose me or him. I needed space to clear my head, to figure out what I wanted without her lies clouding my judgment. Mia didn't argue. She looked shocked, maybe even a little scared, but she didn't fight me on it. She just nodded, saying she understood. The next few days were a blur. I packed up a few things and moved out to stay with a friend for a while. Being away from her was painful, but at the same time, it was like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. I didn't have to worry about where she was, what she was doing, or who she was with. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I could breathe again. During that time apart, I started going to therapy on my own. I needed help processing everything, figuring out how to move forward. The therapist helped me see that it wasn't my fault, that Mia's choices were hers alone, and that I couldn't control what she did or didn't do. I also realized that, deep down, I had been holding on to an image of our marriage that no longer existed. I kept hoping for the woman I married to come back, but she was gone, replaced by someone who could lie to my face and betray me so easily. After a few weeks, Mia reached out. She wanted to meet and talk about where we stood. I agreed, but by then, my feelings had shifted. I wasn't angry anymore, just numb. When we met, she told me that she had ended things with Connor for good, that she realized what a mistake she had made, and she wanted to work on our marriage. But I could tell by the way she said it that she wasn't fully invested. She was still holding something back. And honestly, I didn't care anymore. I had spent so much time trying to fix something that was already broken beyond repair. I didn't trust her, and I knew I never would. No matter what she said or did, the damage was done. I told her I wanted a divorce. Mia cried, saying she didn't want that, but I was done. I couldn't live in a marriage where trust had been shattered so completely. It wasn't just about the affair anymore, it was about all the lies, the deception, the way she had strung me along even after I knew the truth. In the end, Mia agreed. She didn't fight me on it. Maybe she knew deep down that it was over, that she had pushed me too far. Or maybe she still hoped that we could fix things down the road. But I knew better. I knew that once the trust is gone, there's no coming back from that. We filed for divorce a few weeks later, and I haven't looked back since. After I told Mia I wanted a divorce, everything moved faster than I expected. We agreed to keep things civil and avoid a long, drawn-out battle. Thankfully, we didn't have kids, so that part wasn't complicated. It was just a matter of splitting up our assets, our home, and our lives. Despite everything, I wanted to keep things as peaceful as possible. I didn't want this to turn into a nasty fight where we both ended up hating each other even more. Mia moved out first. I stayed in the house for a few weeks to sort through my things, but eventually, I decided to sell it. The memories there were too painful, too full of what could have been. I couldn't walk through the rooms without thinking about the life we had built together, and how it had all fallen apart. So, I put the house on the market and moved into a small apartment closer to the city. Starting over, I guess. Even though we weren't fighting, the divorce process still felt like a marathon. Every time I saw her name in an email or on a document, it brought back a flood of emotions. Part of me missed her, or at least missed who she used to be. Another part of me was just angry that she had thrown everything away for someone else, and that even when she had a chance to come clean, she kept lying. Throughout the process, I heard bits and pieces about Connor. They didn't stay together, which didn't surprise me. Mia had told me she ended things with him, but I found out from a mutual friend that he had moved on to someone else, a new woman he met during one of his environmental adventures. It stung to hear that Mia had risked our entire marriage for a guy who didn't even stick around, but at the same time, it gave me some weird sense of closure. At least I wasn't the only one she was disposable to. What really shocked me was how Mia handled everything. For a while, she tried to act like we could still be friends, as if we could just sweep everything under the rug and pretend it never happened. She'd send these casual texts asking how I was doing, or drop by to pick up something she'd forgotten from the house, and I could see it in her eyes. She wanted me to say that everything was fine, that we could somehow go back to the way things were. But I couldn't. I didn't have it in me to play that game. Being around her just reminded me of everything that had been lost. So eventually, I stopped responding to her messages. I distanced myself from her, from all of it. I didn't need the constant reminder of what we'd gone through, and I certainly didn't need her trying to make herself feel better by pretending we could still be in each other's lives. Once the divorce was finalized, I thought I'd feel relieved. In some ways, I did. The weight of it all, the betrayal, the lies, the constant back and forth, it was finally over. But it wasn't the kind of relief I had imagined. It was more like a numbness. I wasn't happy, but I wasn't angry anymore either. I was just empty. Life after the divorce was a strange adjustment. I had been married for so long that I didn't really know what to do with myself. I'd come home from work to an empty apartment, no one waiting for me, no one to talk to about my day. At first, the silence was unbearable. I'd stay late at the office just to avoid coming home to it. But eventually, I started to appreciate the quiet. It gave me time to think, to reflect on everything that had happened, and to figure out what I wanted moving forward. I threw myself into work, focusing on my career and rebuilding the parts of my life that had nothing to do with Mia. I started spending more time with friends, reconnecting with people I had drifted away from during my marriage. It felt good to have a support system again, people who cared about me and weren't tied to the mess of my relationship. They didn't ask questions or push me to talk about the divorce, and for a while, that's exactly what I needed, just a break from thinking about it all. But no matter how busy I kept myself, there were still moments when the reality of what had happened hit me hard. I'd see couples at a restaurant or hear a song on the radio that reminded me of better times, and I'd feel this deep ache in my chest. It's like I was grieving a loss, but the person I was grieving was still out there, living her life as if nothing had changed. That was the hardest part, the idea that she had moved on, that she was fine, while I was still picking up the pieces. Months went by, and I started to feel more like myself again. Therapy helped. Talking to someone who didn't know either of us, who could look at the situation objectively, made me realize that holding on to the pain wasn't going to help me move forward. I had to accept what had happened, but I also had to let it go. Mia's choices weren't a reflection of me. They were about her, her own issues, her own lack of commitment. It took a long time to stop blaming myself, to stop wondering what I could have done differently. But eventually, I got there. One day, out of the blue, I got a text from Mia. She apologized again, saying she had been doing a lot of thinking and realized how much she had hurt me. She said she regretted everything, that losing me was the biggest mistake she had ever made. Part of me wanted to believe her, to think that maybe she had finally learned something from all of this. But I didn't respond. I knew that no amount of apologies could undo the damage. Trust, once broken, can't be repaired with words. That text was the last time I heard from her. And honestly, I was fine with that. I didn't need closure from her. I had found it on my own. Looking back, I learned a lot from this whole experience. I learned that trust is everything in a relationship, and once it's gone, there's no going back. I also learned that sometimes, no matter how much you love someone, they're not the right person for you. Love isn't enough if it's not backed by respect, honesty, and commitment. If there's one piece of advice I'd give to anyone going through something like this, it's to trust your gut. If something feels off, don't ignore it. And if someone shows you who they really are, believe them the first time. Don't waste your time hoping they'll change. Because in the end, you deserve to be with someone who chooses you, and only you, every single day. As for me, I'm still figuring things out, still healing. But for the first time in a long time, I feel like I'm on the right path. And that's enough for now. The months after the divorce were an odd mix of freedom and loneliness. On one hand, I felt lighter, like I could finally move forward without the weight of Mia's betrayal hanging over me. On the other hand, there were nights where the quiet of my apartment felt like a constant reminder that my life wasn't what I had expected it to be. I had spent years picturing a future with Mia, and now I had to reshape my entire world without her in it. But as time passed, I realized that I wasn't just grieving the loss of Mia, I was grieving the loss of the person I used to be with her. The version of myself that believed in our future, that trusted her completely, that thought love was enough to hold us together no matter what. It took a lot of reflection, a lot of hard conversations with myself, to understand that it wasn't just about what Mia had done. It was about how I had let myself be so blind to it for so long. I kept thinking if I had noticed the signs earlier, maybe I could have done something, stopped it from happening. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. Once trust is broken, everything else crumbles with it. I learned that the hard way. After the divorce, I threw myself into work even more, picking up extra projects, taking on new clients. It helped distract me, gave me something to focus on besides the mess of my personal life. I started to get back into some old hobbies too, things I had let slip during my marriage. I reconnected with old friends, started going to the gym more, even joined a local hiking group just to get out of my apartment on weekends. That's where I met Lauren. I wasn't looking for anything romantic, honestly. The thought of getting into another relationship so soon after Mia felt impossible. But Lauren was different. She wasn't someone who made me feel like I had to forget about my past, or pretend like I wasn't still hurting. Instead, she made it easy to be myself, to talk about what I had been through without feeling judged or rushed to move on. We started hanging out casually, just hiking with the group at first, and then grabbing coffee afterward. Slowly, things grew from there. It wasn't like a whirlwind romance, but something much quieter, much steadier. Lauren was patient, understanding, and most of all, she never pressured me to be more than I was ready for. As we spent more time together, I realized how different everything felt with her. There were no games, no secrets, no second-guessing every word or action. With Mia, I had always felt like I was trying to live up to some impossible standard, like I had to keep things perfect, or she'd lose interest. With Lauren, things were simple. Honest. It wasn't long before I told her about Mia. She knew something had happened, of course, but I hadn't gone into detail. When I finally opened up about the affair, the lies, and the divorce, she just listened. No judgment, no pity, just understanding. It felt good to talk about it, not in the way I had before with friends or my therapist, but with someone who I knew I could trust. Lauren didn't try to fix things or tell me how I should feel. She just let me be. That was what I needed the most, someone who accepted me as I was, scars and all. As things with Lauren deepened, I started to realize how much I had changed since Mia. I was more cautious now, slower to trust, and that made me nervous. I didn't want to carry the baggage of my past into this new relationship, but it was hard not to. Sometimes, when Lauren would cancel plans or get caught up in work, I'd feel that old panic rise up, the fear that she might be lying, that history might repeat itself. But I had to remind myself that Lauren wasn't Mia. She hadn't given me any reason to doubt her, and I couldn't let my past with Mia ruin what I was building with her. Eventually, I opened up to Lauren about those fears too. I told her how hard it was for me to fully trust again, how I sometimes caught myself overthinking things that probably didn't even matter. She understood. She told me that trust, once broken, takes time to rebuild, even in a new relationship. And she was willing to give me that time. That's when I knew I was ready to move on. It didn't happen all at once, but slowly, piece by piece, I started to let go of the anger, the pain, and the mistrust that Mia had left me with. I wasn't completely healed, but I was healing. And Lauren was patient enough to walk through that process with me. One day, a few months into our relationship, I ran into Mia. I hadn't seen her since the divorce was finalized, and honestly, I hadn't thought much about her in a long time. It was a random encounter at the grocery store. She looked different. Maybe it was the guilt or maybe she had just moved on too, but she didn't have the same spark in her eyes that she used to. We exchanged awkward pleasantries, asking how each other was doing, keeping the conversation surface level. She asked if I was seeing anyone, and for the first time, I didn't feel any bitterness when I told her about Lauren. She smiled, a little sadly, and told me she was happy for me. Then she apologized again, one last time. She said she wished she could take it all back, that she regretted what she had done. But I could tell it wasn't an apology meant to win me back. It was her way of trying to find closure for herself. I thanked her for the apology, but by then, I had already made peace with it all. I didn't need her to say sorry anymore. I didn't need anything from her. As I walked away, I realized something. For the first time since everything had happened, I wasn't angry. I wasn't hurt. I wasn't bitter. I was just, okay. And that was more than enough. Moving forward wasn't about erasing the past, but about learning from it and allowing myself to trust again, to love again. And that's what I was doing with Lauren, building something real, something honest. Something worth holding on to. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. The final chapter of this whole experience felt like it came much later than I expected. In the months after running into Mia, my life truly began to take shape without her shadow looming over me. Lauren and I grew closer, and for the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of peace. It wasn't the intense, whirlwind kind of love I once thought I needed, it was something more steady, more real. And honestly, it was exactly what I needed. As our relationship deepened, Lauren moved in with me. The apartment that once felt empty and quiet now had life again. The walls that had witnessed so much pain and loneliness started to hold new memories, ones filled with laughter, quiet moments of understanding, and a growing sense of trust. I never thought I'd get back to that place, but somehow, I did. Every now and then, I'd think back to everything that had happened with Mia. Not in a way that hurt anymore, but with a strange sense of gratitude. It sounds crazy, but if she hadn't done what she did, if I hadn't gone through that pain, I wouldn't be where I was now. It was like shedding an old life, one that wasn't meant for me, and stepping into something new. Something better. About a year after the divorce, I received a letter from Mia. A real, handwritten letter, which surprised me in a world where everything is digital. She wrote to tell me that she had moved to another city, that she had started fresh, and was trying to rebuild her life. She said she was seeing a therapist, working through the choices she had made, and that she finally understood the full weight of what she had done to me. She didn't ask for forgiveness, she didn't need to. Instead, she thanked me. She thanked me for letting her go, for not dragging us both through a long, bitter fight, and for giving her the chance to start over. I folded the letter and put it away. I didn't feel the need to respond. I didn't need to rehash the past or dig into old wounds. I had already moved past it. Mia's chapter in my life had closed, and I had written new ones since. Lauren and I talked about the future often. Unlike my marriage with Mia, this relationship didn't feel like a ticking clock, where I had to constantly work to keep things from falling apart. With Lauren, everything felt easy, like we were building something naturally, without forcing it. We talked about marriage, about kids, about all the things I once thought I'd never want again. But with her, those ideas didn't scare me. They felt possible. One evening, as we sat together on the balcony of our apartment, looking out at the sunset, I realized how far I had come. The Jason who had discovered Mia's betrayal, who had spent nights awake on the couch, riddled with anger and confusion, was a different person. He was someone I had left behind. Lauren turned to me, her eyes reflecting the soft orange glow of the setting sun, and said something I'll never forget. She told me how much she loved me, but more importantly, how grateful she was that I had let her in. She knew I had been broken before, that trust had been hard for me. But she saw the way I had allowed myself to heal, to let love in again, and for that, she said, she admired me. In that moment, I realized something important. It wasn't just about moving on from the past or finding someone new. It was about learning to trust again, not just another person, but myself. Trusting that I could be happy, that I could make better choices, and that I deserved love, despite everything that had happened. A few months after that night, I proposed to Lauren. It wasn't a grand, over-the-top gesture. It was simple, quiet, and intimate, just like us. She said yes, and we spent the night talking about our future, about everything we wanted to build together. There was no fear, no hesitation. Just excitement for what was to come. As we started planning the wedding, I couldn't help but think about how different this felt compared to my first marriage. There was no pressure to prove anything, no need to live up to some perfect ideal. It was just us, two people who had found each other at the right time, ready to build a life together. The day we got married, standing in front of our closest friends and family, I felt a sense of peace that I hadn't known before. The vows I made that day were different too. They weren't about promises of perfection, or about making sure everything was always happy and smooth. They were about trust, about honesty, and about being real with each other, even when things got tough. After the ceremony, as we danced under the soft lights of the reception, Lauren rested her head on my shoulder and whispered, "We made it." And she was right. We did. Looking back now, I can see that everything had led me to this moment. All the pain, all the heartbreak, even the betrayal, they had all been steps on the path to where I was meant to be. If I hadn't gone through it, if I hadn't experienced the worst of it, I wouldn't have known how to appreciate the best. So, if there's one thing I've learned from all of this, it's that healing isn't a straight line. It's messy, it's hard, and sometimes it takes longer than you'd like. But it's possible. And when you finally get to the other side, when you let go of the past and open yourself up to the possibility of something better, you realize that the future is brighter than you ever imagined. For anyone reading this, going through their own heartbreak, just know that it gets better. You'll find your way, just like I did. And when you do, you'll look back and see that every painful moment was worth it. Because it led you to where you're meant to be. As for me, I'm exactly where I want to be, standing side by side with the woman I love, ready for whatever comes next. And for the first time in a long time, I'm excited for the future.